Hi, this is Jean Jo, and welcome back to another edition of Perisson Pulse. We're at the end of May, and I hope that all of you had a very meaningful and restful Memorial Day weekend. I'm sorry I wasn't able to do the video last week. I wasn't able to put up a new video last week, but we did post the video for our seminar, which was on the investing wisely in the golden years. So I hope that if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, that you'll be sure to tune in for that. So for this week, my topic is going to actually be about buyer's agents and why it matters to a seller to have a buyer's agent. This is related in large part due to the fact of the recent litigation and NAR settlement that has been put in place. Just as an update for that before I launch into the topic, after the NAR and CAR meetings, it did come out that the deadline for implementation of all of the changes that need to be made as a result of the settlement has been set for August 17th. Primarily, those changes are going to be two main ones. One has to do with the MLS, the multiple listing service, and that's for the MLSs to actually remove the fields that show any kind of the broker compensation that a listing agent would be offering to a buyer's agent. In the past and currently, the way that it works is that it will actually show up in the MLS as whatever that amount may be that a listing broker is offering to a buyer's agent, and that is actually binding. It's a unilateral offer and it's binding. So whoever brings the successful offer will be entitled to the compensation as listed in the MLS. So that's one of the major changes that is going to be taking place. How it will pan out, I mean, obviously, it's just the field is going to go away, but there are some different repercussions to that, and we'll be looking into that further. I am actually on the multiple listings board for my local MLS, and so we'll be having we've already been in a lot of discussions on it, and definitely over the next few months, we'll be seeing some of those changes take place. The second major one has to do with buyers agents and their relationships with the buyers. And so what will happen is that there will be a requirement for everyone who is part of NAR or the local MLSs that are owned by the associations, that anybody who's a part of that as an agent will need to have a signed agreement with the buyer showing how much compensation they will be due. So there are different ways that will be worked out, where you're going to have a bunch of forms rolling out here in California. I think I heard that it was 60 some that will be actually amended to take into account these two changes. And then we're getting about 10 forms that are new. So those are those are the two major changes that need to happen at the latest by August 17th. But here in California, the new forms that we're getting will be rolling out at the end of June, on June 25th. And that will be impacting a little bit of what we see in terms of business. Some of those forms have to do with having addendums or changes to pre-existing forms prior to all of the changes that are taking place. So what I'm planning to actually for the month of June is to go through some of the major changes in terms of what the forms are. I think even if you're not a real estate agent, it's just good for just our clients to understand, what are the changes? What is this form about? Again, it is going to be required, and that's going to be generally before there are any showings that take place, definitely before any offers are written. So that is something that we'll be seeing those changes coming into effect over the next few months. So with that, I'm going to go into my main topic today, which is buyer's agents, why it matters to sellers. So I did do, as I mentioned, a video a few weeks back about why a buyer would want to have their own agent. But I thought it would be interesting to examine it from a seller's perspective and why it's important for a seller to know that the buyer that's on the other end of it is also being represented by a realtor who knows what they're doing. So much as I did for the video on buyers and their agents, I thought it would be good to go through the step-by-step in terms of the selling process. So in the selling process, obviously as a listing agent, I do spend a lot of time before even a house hits the market. There's a lot of consultation that goes on, preparing the property for marketing, pricing, etc. Once it hits the market, though, it definitely can make a difference to have agents that are involved in the process. yes, now we have internet, and there are many sites where if it comes on the MLS, the buyers will find them. Many times my buyer clients will find property before I do. So there is that. And there are open houses that they can go to. But there's also a benefit to being able to have a buyer who has an agent who will be able to open the door for them, who will be able to maybe suggest properties that they might not have otherwise considered. And that's happened to me a few times when I'm working with my clients and I go, well, this doesn't quite fit their criteria, but it might be something that could work for them because I'm understanding their needs and what they're looking for. And that has happened several times. And so being able to suggest that because I'm aware of that, going on broker tours, sometimes being able to, have agents who will uh, just even, especially if the property is occupied and you need appointments to be made, having buyers with agents who can help arrange for that and just facilitate the process is important, because even if somebody goes to an open house, sometimes, you still, it's a 10-minute, 5-minute walk around with a lot of other people there. It's very different for me being able to go back to a property and spending some quality time there whenever possible. And so that's a way in which the buyers having an agent can be very helpful. And then considering the review of disclosures. So assuming that a buyer really likes the property and is willing to consider it, the next thing that we usually do is to request disclosures. In our area, we do actually, as a matter of course, encourage our sellers to provide as many of the disclosures upfront as possible, including property inspections and termite inspections, roof inspections, sometimes sewer lateral, everything in order to encourage buyers to potentially be able to come in with less contingencies. That's something that we do in our area. I know it's different from other places of the country. What's really nice is that when we have the disclosures, we do make the disclosures available, and it makes a huge difference to have a buyer who has an agent on their side, a professional on their side, who is able to guide them through the disclosures and how to see them. Of course, we're not contractors or home inspectors ourselves, and so that's not our specialty. But with all of my buyers, what I would do is actually go through and call out any red flags and all of that, and be able to help guide them through so that when they do get into the transaction, they're not surprised. That is super important when I'm dealing with when I am representing a seller. It's very important to me to know who I'm working with on the other side. And so if the buyers have a professional agent who is helping them review disclosures, helping them to really understand what they're getting into, that can make a huge difference later on, because the buyers who, they are given a lot of information up front, may not be able to review everything as much as they would like. And if they later on, after they purchase the home, they have an issue, it's going to come back to everybody. It's going to come back to their agent. It's going to come back to the seller's agent as well as the seller. And so just being able to know that you have, again, a professional who is helping to be that second set of eyes to look at the disclosures and to help explain and put things into perspective for a buyer can be just so invaluable when it comes to making sure that we have a smooth transaction and that we have a smooth after the transaction. The next has to do with really being able to have qualifying offers as we go through that process. In our area, the inventory, with all the ups and downs, inventory is still very limited. We're at about 1 or 2 months worth of inventory. And so it is still very common to have a multiple offer situation. And in those cases, you can really tell, who is being guided by professional agents who can guide them through to not only give you the best price, but also have terms that make sense. Doesn't always mean that it has to be non-contingent, but there can be some contingencies built in that really make sense, and that we have a plan for being able to work through them. So that is very important to have. Just having an agent who is maybe hired to write an offer is, that might sound attractive because it might be cheaper, but in the long run, really you do get what you pay for. And I think having, again, a qualified professional agent who understands the contract, even though we're not attorneys, but who understands the contract, who understands what it means to put an offer together and to be able to bring it through to the close. It's always been important, but I think it's that much more important now because we are going to be facing some different changes. There are going to be some people who say, well, I'll just write an offer for you and think that that's all there is when it comes to being able to represent a buyer. And it is important to a seller. It's not just only important to a buyer. It's always been important to a seller to have a professional agent who can guide them through that process because it'll make all the difference in a transaction. The next is negotiations, and this is closely related to the offers, but it also has to do with following up during the whole settlement process, any negotiations that need to take place. And it's as much as, I've been in the business over 16 years now, no transaction is exactly the same. And there are things that will come up in the process of a transaction. I wouldn't say every single one, but most of the transactions, because every buyer is unique, every seller, every property, the market conditions are unique. And so, and every property, you may think that you're going along smoothly and something may come up. During that time, it is important to be able to have a party on the other side that knows how to work together as a team where we can come to a reasonable resolution for all parties involved. And again, closely related to that is the whole coordination throughout escrow and being able to have somebody who's engaged, not because they just simply wrote an offer and then walked away, but having an agent on the other side who can give you updates to let you know how things are going through escrow, who can be following up with the loan agent, who can be following up with their buyers, and then all the paperwork and the files that need to be taken care of. That's not a small thing. And so really as a seller and as someone who represents sellers, I would say that is super important, again, to be able to know that you have a buyer who is being guided through and having that transaction to be able to work on it together, that it would go through to a successful end. And finally, after the close, as I mentioned, I've been alluding to all along, it's not just a matter of getting an offer written, being able to make sure all the money's in and getting it closed, getting to a successful close. Of course, that's important because that's how you get your money as a seller. It's also important that after the close, you don't hear back from the buyers. And to know that the buyer is represented, has been guided by an agent who is professional, who knows what they're doing, who's been guiding them through that whole process, who can be that first point of contact if anything goes wrong. I think that's huge because we don't want, after a transaction as a seller doesn't want to hear back from a buyer because that's almost never good. We really want to be able to have cases, every situation to be able to close where all parties are happy, where the buyers can move in and be happy, or, whether if it's a rental property, to be able to rent it out, not to be in a situation where they felt that they didn't have the proper representation. Okay, so having said all of this and that, showing the importance of why a seller would want to make sure that a buyer is represented, then the question comes, well, how does the compensation happen? In the written agreements that are going to be newly required, it does, between the buyer and their agent, it does have a place where basically the buyer and the agent will be coming to some kind of an agreement in terms of how what that buyer's agent will be compensated. The problem that can come up, though, is that there are maybe some buyers who don't have those additional funds to be able to pay for their own agent, to pay those costs. So just as an example, if a buyer is looking to pay to buy something at $1 million, and they have agreed with their agent that they're going to pay them 3%. And again, this is all negotiable, but I'm just trying to do the math, that was going to cost them $30,000. So if you're talking about a buyer who may have limited funds, they're just saving up their down payment and all of that, and don't really have that extra $30,000 to pay for this $1 million transaction, then, and it could be that it just that much will actually change in terms of how much they can qualify for. So there is going to be some amount of difficulty there. So what are the solutions and what are the ways in which a buyer's agent can be compensated in such a way that it will not deter a buyer from being able to buy, or be something that they can actually afford to go through? So first of all, the seller can still offer to pay for the buyer's agent. The primary way that this is done now is actually as a co-op out of the listing agent fees. So the listing agreement as currently written, the way that it's negotiated is a seller and their agent will actually come to get together to negotiate in terms of what the listing agent will be receiving. And then in that agreement, it does say that there is a way in which now out of the listing agent fees, they pay a fee to the cooperating broker, a compensation to the cooperating broker. And so that's how it has been working. That is still allowed to take place, although there are going to be some changes in terms of our listing agreement and separating those out a little bit more, but that is still allowed. It just cannot be on the MLS, posted on the MLS, the multiple listing service. How that's going to be done remains to be seen. I think there may be people who add them into the disclosure packages or advertised on their separate website that is not associated with the MLS. So there are different things that can happen with that. Another way is for the seller to pay the buyer's agent directly through escrow. The way that would happen is it doesn't come out of what they negotiate with the listing agent, but most likely the way that it could take place is if a buyer comes in and with their offer, which they can do now, actually says to the seller, Mr. Seller, I am obligated to pay my agent X amount. I'm willing to offer you a certain price, but I would like you to take over paying for my buyer's agent. And so that is something that can be done, again, directly through escrow. Doesn't necessarily have to be something that was advertised or known ahead of time, but it's part of negotiations. And a seller could say no, and we might see a little bit of back and forth where the buyer has to say, well, okay, if you're not going to pay for my agent, but I still want an agent, then maybe can you give me some other kind of credit, or I'm going to have to lower the price because I'm going to need to have those extra funds to be able to pay my agent. Just as a note, as a concession, there are concessions that are actually still going to be allowed where a seller can offer a concession. This happens already in terms of sometimes with HOAs, with a condo, you'll have a seller say, I'm going to credit the buyer a certain amount for some months worth or a year's worth of HOA fees, or if there are repairs that need to be made, maybe there's a concession. So sellers can offer a concession that cannot be directly related to buyer agent fees. It may be somewhat related in the sense that if a buyer is saying, well, I have to pay this amount, they're getting concession from the seller for something else. And that is not related directly to the buyer agent fees, but because of that concession, it frees up more of the funds for the buyers to be able to pay their agent. So that's a way in which maybe the buyers might be able to pay their agents, but it is not something that should be directly related. When we say concession, it's concession. It's not a workaround to try to go back to being able to have, just paying the buyer agent fees. So I did want to add in a note regarding VA loans, the Veteran Administration loans. These loans do not allow for buyers to pay for things like their buyer agent fees. As of last week, there was an announcement that was made that they are going to be making a temporary exception for this, considering what's happening with the NAR settlement. And I think that really underscores the importance of, why people think that it's important for a buyer to be represented, to have representation. And so it is a temporary exception until the legislation can be changed. Hopefully it will be, because I think it's important when you have, regardless of whether it's a VA loan or if it's an FHA loan, which I have not yet heard about in terms of updates for that one, but for the buyer to be able to have that ability, if they have the funds for it, to be able to pay their own agent. If they do not have the ability to do that, at the very least, they may need to request that from the sellers. And so sellers need to be aware of that and ready to potentially be able to pay for that, and to be able to make sure that the buyer's agent is being compensated, and so that the buyer is being properly represented. And a final note again, although I've said it a couple times, whatever is negotiated in terms of any offers of compensation to a buyer's agent, that cannot be offered via the MLS, the multiple listing service. So that's something that we'll be seeing the changes taking place in the months to come, but just something to make a note of. So how all of this is going to pan out is still not fully worked out, but we will be working through it. And I just wanted to kind of bring it all back. I used the slide before on my one about buyer's agents. Is it's all about relationships, and I think that's really one thing that is critical as we go through the transition. I'm talking to agents and the seasoned agents, and those of us who have been thinking about this for a long time. It's not. Uh, we're all expecting that it's going to get a little bit messy over the next 3 to 6 months, I think, as we work through this. And how do we make sure that buyers are being properly represented? How do we work through their compensation? How does that impact loans? How that impacts prices? There's a lot that can be happening. And I just want to bring it back to, it is all about relationships. It's about making sure that, we're all talking. And one of the good things about the changes that are happening with the ANR settlement, is that it is really going to call for agents to be, for all of us professionals to be talking to each other more and making sure that we're working together to take care of our clients in the best way possible. I think that's what it all comes down to. And then with that, I'd like to finish off by doing a reminder and announcement of our continuing seminar series, The Real Estate and Finance in the Golden Years. Our next one will be on July 17th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. via Zoom, and we'll be talking about remodeling options for aging in place. Our speaker will be Dr. Jill Burkey, who is the founder and owner of a company called Silver Spaces, which has designed software to help evaluate and assess homes to make sure that they are safe and healthy for individuals. We will be covering things like, how to assess a home in terms of being able to stay there for the long term, and then what are the different options to be able to help adapt it, even if you're not there yet and you're still very, physically able. What are some remodeling options as we remodel now to keep in mind for the future so that you can stay in your home longer and safely? In August, we have on August 17th, which is a Saturday, for those of you who are in the area, we'll be having in person a seminar, a whole symposium actually, which is longer, and that'll be on family matters, caring for aging parents. So for that session, we'll have a variety of different speakers. We'll be talking about things like reverse mortgages, long-term care insurance, recognizing early signs of Alzheimer's, developing, working on trust, and all the different things to consider as our parents age and as also we ourselves are aging. And so I'm really looking forward to that and hoping that many people will be able to join us. And then in September, we'll have estate planning. John Martin, Esquire, will be joining us. And on September 11th, we'll have it via Zoom, which will be a basic course from 7 to 8:30, talking about, the whole aspects of what is estate planning? What is a living trust? Why do you need one? And, how to navigate all of that. And then in person, 2 weeks later on September 25th, we will have our advanced session, which has to do with a little bit, it goes advanced. It goes into a little more detail in terms of the different things to consider. For instance, if there are multiple heirs or blended families where you have children from different marriages maybe involved, different multiple properties and different uses for the properties. And so it might be a little more complicated. And the goal of this is to be aware of the different issues and make sure that, when we do pass on, that our children, our heirs, do not have to go to court and have an easier time in terms of being able to handle the property and the legacy that's been left to them. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you found that to be interesting information. For June, as I mentioned, I am planning to go through more of the forms that we'll be seeing in terms of the buyer broker forms and whatnot, and just kind of going into them in a little more detail and how they'll be working. And I will also be doing a market update in June for how we've been going throughout the course of the year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll stick around on the channel because we have tons of videos that we've been building up, and I would love to have more people watch that. Please subscribe if you haven't done so, and make sure to share the video with your friends. I really do believe at Perisson, it stands for abundance. And I do really believe that we live in abundance, and as much as we share with one another and help each other, we'll all be able to thrive together and experience abundance in our lives. So have a wonderful week and weekend ahead, and looking forward to June with everybody. Bye-bye.